Hello and welcome to this edition of Gripping Stuff. My name is Cliff Perry and I look after the Adhesion Working Group. This is a joint VR and Railtrack body dedicated to helping you manage the problems of low adhesion in the leaf fall season. My day job is MD of Thameslink, and we, like other railways, are acutely aware of the impact that low adhesion can have on running a safe and punctual railway. So we hope to update you with work going on behind the scenes to help manage the problem and prepare for this autumn's leaf fall. We also hope to remind you about the braking techniques that should be used in low adhesion conditions. The key message has not changed: safety before punctuality. During the leaf fall, we rely on your skills and alertness in a special way. There was some good news about 1995, with less adhesion-related incidents being recorded. But with over 50 SPADs and 350 station overruns, there's absolutely no need for complacency. The weather may have helped, but the contribution that was made by railway staff in managing the problem and the conditions cannot be underestimated. And we need you to apply the right techniques and to carry on doing so in order that our good safety record is actually improved. We can start by asking drivers around the system what they feel about the problem and how to manage it.
Well, I think one improvement could be made by putting sandboxes on them.
Sandite is effective if it's continuously laid down in a continuous programme. But obviously when things occurred, operating difficulties, such things like that, then you get the problems again. But it must be a continuous programme in especially exceptional weather conditions like leaf fall, something like that.
And they seem to get cut back at the wrong time of year. A lot of tree cutting seems to be done early autumn, which is fine, but of course it's too much to be done, so they're still doing it come early winter.
Lots of drivers get really uptight about not stopping trains. And starting is a different, not quite so bad, but actually stopping. There's lots of heart flutters that go on regarding stopping trains. It's not only at stations either, it's at various locations and in signals in the areas as well.
I do personally think that the last decade of work on Sandite has been an improvement. There's no doubt about that. As long as they get it down in time for the first services.
More training, I think, towards the actual braking technique is involved. And also what people have got to remember is that there's never an ideal situation as regards the braking conditions, the weather conditions. There's always exceptional circumstances that you can't just lay down on a computer program or put in a book.
I've been rather aggrieved at the fact that the line-side foliage has been allowed to get to the state it is now. I mean, when I started 25 years ago, you could drive down either the Hastings branch or the main line and see the majority of the countryside, whereas now it's a green tunnel. And, farmers' hedgerows are now small copses.
We don't feel that the feedback from Railtrack is very good as far as foliage cutting goes. We can identify a spot that's particularly bad. We don't seem to get any feedback at all about whether they're going to actually do any tree trimming in that area. And when they do tree lopping, it seems to be in places where it doesn't really seem necessary to do it.
Well, you bring your train down under control before you get to where you want to be. That's it. And there's, time-wise, where that goes out the window.
When we complain, we're not doing it for fun. We're doing it for everybody's safety, not just for the driver at the front. So, that would be one complaint I'd have. And also, where we complain about such things as overhanging trees, it seems to take an awfully long time for anything to be done about it. I'm not talking days or weeks, I'm talking months.
I think if the drivers got more control of the brake, I think that would be a far better system altogether.
Let's begin by looking at the preparations underway for this coming autumn. Railtrack has undertaken a major vegetation clearance programme in an attempt to address the problem at its source. Most of you will have seen this in action. Sandite remains one of our main weapons in the fight against low adhesion. It's basically a mixture of sand and water, or a pre-mixed paste known as traction gel. Once laid on the railhead, it'll maintain a good adhesion level and help to break down compacted leaf film. Much effort has gone into identifying the high-risk locations, and these will form part of the Sandite program. These locations should, by now, be published in the sectional appendix. Make sure you know them. Many of the older and less reliable Sandite vehicles are being replaced by converted locomotives or newer vehicles. This should help to ensure the provision of a 100% service.
Been 2 or 3 more trains that have actually gone down after the Sandite.
If you're watching this video programme, no doubt it's forming part of your safety briefing in preparation for this year's leaf fall season. It's up to you to ensure that you make the best use of such briefings and that you're fully aware of what's required of you. Now let's have a look at some of the research and development currently being undertaken by the Adhesion Working Group to combat adhesion-related problems and find new solutions. Last year, a number of train operators tried a leaf fall prediction forecast, aimed at helping management understand the progress of the leaf fall season and identify days when exceptional conditions may exist. For 1996, it's hoped to improve the accuracy of the forecasts, both for targeting resources for remedial action and as an adhesion early warning system. The emergency sanding device has been experimentally fitted to Class 159 units. It consists of 2 fire extinguisher type bottles filled with sand and maintained under high pressure. When the device is fired by the driver, sand is forced from the bottles through a nozzle onto the rail ahead of the leading bogie. We've now had nearly 12 months' experience of the emergency sanding device on South West Trains' 159 fleet, and performance so far has been promising. 3 spads were prevented last autumn, and a further 2 would have been had the system been used. Further experience gained this autumn will provide more data for comparison against the automatic system. Unlike the emergency sanding device, the driver isn't required to operate the automatic sanding system. It's done automatically by the WSP equipment if it senses a wheel set beginning to slide when a step 3 or emergency brake application is made. Sand is then ejected onto the rails from the trailing bogie of the leading vehicle. As we reported in issue 2 of Gripping Stuff, it wasn't possible to get the automatic sanding system into service in time for autumn 1995. However, the initial trial fleet of 25 2-car Class 165s are now fitted. Work is also underway to complete the fitting of the remainder of Thames Trains Class 165 fleet and their 90-mile-per-hour Class 166s in time for the 1996 leaf fall season. The extension of the automatic sanding system trial will speed up the evaluation process, allowing a better understanding of the benefits and disbenefits of both systems. We all know how difficult it can sometimes be to determine whether or not the rails are contaminated. Sometimes contamination is very obvious, such as crushed leaves, but at other times there's no visible clue. This can make it very difficult for someone visually inspecting the rails to give reliable advice on whether the rails need treating or not. To overcome this problem, a number of portable adhesion measuring instruments have been obtained from an American company for trial this autumn. They'll be tested by BR Research and Railtrack Zones to determine their accuracy and potential use for the future. If they're successful, the result will be improved accuracy of reporting rail conditions after examination. As we've seen, sandite has been traditionally used to lay a protective layer on the rail to improve adhesion and help break down the leaf film. However, some use has been made of relatively low pressure water jetting and rail scrubbing equipment, such as those fitted to on-track machines, to remove contamination. This autumn a trial will be conducted to determine the effectiveness of a very high pressure water cannon. These are used in other countries and have potential advantages over sandite. There may, however, be some disadvantages which the trials will aim to identify. This part of our programme outlines the fundamental principles for you to remember when driving this autumn. As you all know, extra care has to be taken in slippery conditions, and the autumn leaf fall period is the time when the risk of contaminated rails is generally at its highest. If you encounter exceptional railhead conditions, report these immediately in accordance with the Rulebook Appendix 1 instructions.
Yes, hello signalling. This is a driver of 1L63. I want to report very low adhesion.
This is essential to warn other drivers of the problems you've encountered and vice versa. Last year there were unnecessary train delays caused by the reporting of conditions which, while they were indeed poor, were not strictly exceptional. As a general rule, exceptional conditions will be those encountered at locations not published in the sectional appendix, or those that are, but where you still have extreme difficulties in stopping, even after adjusting your braking technique accordingly. When you're advised that exceptional railhead conditions exist, adjust your braking technique and take extreme care. Don't run the risk of failing to stop at a signal or overrunning a station platform, even if it means extending your running time. Once reported, the rails will be inspected and then treated if necessary. A controlled test stop will then be arranged. If the conditions are found to be no longer exceptional, normal working can be resumed. If you're asked to make a controlled test stop, remember to brake your train as you would normally for the prevailing weather and rail conditions at that location, rather than for exceptional railhead conditions or for a dry summer's day. Don't forget to advise the signaller of the result and whether the rail conditions should still be treated as exceptional. If you report the rail conditions are no longer exceptional, arrangements will be made for normal working to resume. Remember that braking distance will always be extended on wet or contaminated rails when compared to those on normal, dry rails. Make sure you're totally familiar with the correct braking technique for the types of train you drive. In every case, you should drive according to the prevailing conditions, braking earlier and lighter. To summarise, take extra care when rail conditions are likely to be poor. Report exceptional railhead conditions. Know the best braking techniques for the type of train you drive. Brake lighter and brake earlier.
We hope this issue of gripping stuff will help you cope safely and effectively with rail conditions this autumn. Much is being done to help, and you will have the opportunity to raise any issues you have in your safety briefings. Remember, safety before punctuality. Thanks for your attention, and I wish you well in looking after all our customers.
In the final part of this programme, we'll look at the basic braking techniques for multiple unit trains in low adhesion conditions. The 3-step braking instructions have recently been revised. Make sure you're aware of the main changes, particularly those related to low adhesion, which we'll look at in this part of the programme. When driving a 3-step disc brake train, brake earlier and lighter, keeping the brake applied and letting the WSP operate. You must resist the temptation to release or fan the brake to regain adhesion. This only prevents the WSP from doing its job. However, remember that the WSP system is designed to make the best use of the available adhesion. It can't raise the adhesion level. The best approach is to try to avoid getting into a situation where the WSP has to operate by braking earlier and lighter. If you suddenly encounter poor rail conditions and there's insufficient distance to stop safely, select emergency and leave the WSP to operate. Leave the brake controller in emergency until the train has stopped. Remember that the visual and audible indications in your cab, such as erratic speedo readings and the sound of the WSP dump valves, only tell you what's happening on the leading vehicle, not on the rest of the train. It's also vitally important to remember that the emergency position should be selected at any time an emergency arises, regardless of the prevailing rail conditions. For 3-step tread brake trains, again you should brake earlier and lighter, but initially select step 1, then increase to step 2. These trains don't have WSP systems, so it's necessary for you to avoid wheel locking by manually controlling the brake. If wheel slide occurs, release and reapply the brake in a lower step. You can then increase the application again to achieve the required braking rate. Repeat this process if wheel slide persists, providing there's sufficient distance available to stop the train safely. If there isn't, select the emergency position and leave it there until the train stops. When driving EP disc brake trains, make an initial application at minimum brake cylinder pressure, then progressively increase the brake application to achieve the intended braking rate to stop safely. If you experience wheel slide, keep the brakes applied and let the WSP operate. Once again, you must resist the temptation to partially release the brake to regain adhesion. This will only prevent the WSP from doing its job. If you suddenly encounter poor rail conditions and there's insufficient distance to stop safely, make an emergency application and leave the WSP to operate until the train has stopped. Remember, the visual and audible indications in your cab only relate to what's happening on the leading vehicle, not on the rest of the train. As with EP disc brake trains, when braking an EP tread brake train in low adhesion conditions, the initial brake application should provide minimum brake cylinder pressure before the brake is progressively increased until sufficient braking rate is obtained to stop at the intended place. EP tread brake trains are not fitted with WSP equipment, so if wheel slide occurs, you must release and reapply a lower brake cylinder pressure to regain adhesion. You can then increase the brake application again to achieve your required braking rate. If wheel slide persists, you can repeat this process if there's enough distance to stop the train safely. If there isn't enough distance, apply the emergency brake and leave it applied until the train has stopped. With the exception of the running brake test, required by the rulebook appendix instructions, you should avoid using the automatic brake when low adhesion conditions are likely or known. This applies to both empty coaching stock and passenger workings. If you have to use the automatic brake in low adhesion conditions, for example if the EP brake has failed, then you should take the train out of service at the first suitable location without causing delay or cancellation. If wheel slide occurs, the automatic brake should not be released and reapplied unless there's sufficient distance available to allow the brakes to be fully released before being suitably reapplied. The brake must not be repeatedly released and reapplied, as such an action will result in a significant loss of brake force due to a reduction in the auxiliary brake reservoir pressure. If wheel slide persists and you're going to have difficulty stopping safely, make an emergency application and leave it on until the train has stopped. If you suddenly encounter poor rail conditions, haven't already braked earlier and lighter, and there's insufficient distance to stop safely, make an emergency application until the train has stopped.